Yeah, I think empathy is a big thing, and understanding, and um, all those different components, they become your superpower, and you can piece things together. I think one thing that I've also learned from myself is to never sell yourself short, whether if it's in your resume or in an interview, to really remember to treat people the same in your professionalism, whether, it's your boss, your coworker, no matter who.
I am so enthusiastic to have with me Sahar today. And I'm enthusiastic to have you here, Sahar, because I know a little bit about you, your background, and the numerous languages that you know. First and foremost, Sahar, welcome to the podcast, my dear.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
How are you doing?
I'm doing great.
That's always wonderful to hear. Sahar, I always love for people to know the individual that they're listening to, who they're hearing information and really tidbits from. So I'd love for you to take me back to who you are before we go into more details and questions. How you grew up, some of the things about you that define who Sahar is today.
I love that question because I feel like my answer is different every time.
Ah,
But so my name is Sahar. I I am born in the US here in California. I grew up in Switzerland and originally from Afghanistan. So I'm Afghan American Swiss.
that's incredible. So your parents are
Yes,
Afghanistani, born in Afghanistan.
correct.
You were born here in the States,
Mhm.
and then you grew up in Switzerland.
Yeah.
That's
So
incredible.
yeah,
I'd
it's
like more details on that.
it is an interesting mix for sure. So maybe to go back, my dad, when he left Afghanistan, he was around 16, 17 years old. This was right, around the time of the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. And he was in the ripe age to join the military, which at that time was extremely dangerous. So their family decided for him to leave, and through a crazy coincidence, a Swiss couple who was at that time traveling through Afghanistan, they came in contact with my grandfather. My grandfather spoke German because he attended a German school in Afghanistan. So, they somehow connected, and this couple, they didn't have any kids, and they were really, they were willing to help my dad and his family for him to be able to leave the country, and give him an opportunity to go to school in Switzerland, which was a very hard path to get out and cross to Switzerland, but they made it work somehow. So they were kind of his foster parents. And my dad was living with them after he finally made it there, with obviously their Swiss values, but he never lost touch to his Afghan roots. So he kind of had both of these two different worlds instilled in him. And so moving forward, when my dad met my mom and they got married here in the US, because my mom at that time was in the US. So my mom left Afghanistan, I think around the same time, probably, or maybe a couple years apart. And they came through India, and eventually made it to the US. And then my parents got married here. And after they got married, they went back to Switzerland because my dad was living in Switzerland at the time. But their plan was always to come back to the US because my mom's family, as well as my dad's family, lived in California, which never happened. So my mom became pregnant with me, and because I was her firstborn, she came to the US to be around family. So I was born in California, and after like 6, 7 months, we left back to Switzerland. So I spent like 7 months in the US, and the rest of my life, I grew up in Switzerland up until 2.5 years ago when I decided to leave Switzerland and move to California. And now I'm here.
Wow. Did your mom live in India or did they simply come through India?
She did actually. So my grandma and my mom's siblings, they lived in India for 2 years before they made it to the US.
It fascinates me, Sahar, all the different cultures that they had the opportunity to experience.
Yeah.
And for you, growing up with Swiss culture, but yet US born, and have home being Afghan culture. What was that like?
Very interesting. So I had a very difficult time, uh, especially in my teenage years when it came to identity questions. I obviously identify as Afghan, which is in my blood, and you can see it, in my face as well. But my outside world was Swiss. So my friends are Swiss, my school, the whole system I grew up with is Swiss. And the reason why I mentioned my dad even growing up between those two is because that was instilled in me too. So at home, I speak Farsi and I'm taught Afghan values and traditions and all that. But outside, I'm a different person. And navigating between those two different and very polar opposite cultures at times was just very confusing because I couldn't really like define as, am I doing the right thing now, or is this right? Is this wrong? So because the two cultures are so far apart from each other, I think that was one of the most challenging things growing up. And as I got older, I started to learn to embrace the best of both worlds. I'm not gonna lie, I still struggle with it sometimes, but I definitely, see the beauty in things more than I did maybe when I was like 13, 14. I was like, I don't want to deal with this. This is, too complicated. You're already dealing with a lot when you're in puberty, finding out who you are, what you want to be, all that stuff. And then on top of it, you have these two very different cultures in you that sometimes don't blend together. And I think it's a beauty in disguise, to say the least.
How were some of the ways, Sahar, that you could think back and go, this is how I learned to deal with my emotional state as well as my mental state? Because you do have, just like you said, polar differences. And for a lot of people that haven't grown up into different cultures,
Mhm.
it doesn't even dawn on them that at home or in certain culture you're hearing one thing and then you go outside and in your normal everyday it's different and then you're kind of in between.
Right.
So how did you mentally learn to work through that? And I say that so that there's kids out there that have challenges that hopefully will hear a nugget from you that they go, well, I can work on things this way.
Right. So I think one thing that when I look back, I was blessed to have great people in my life. And I started to see that later on because at that time I was only focusing on the negative. I was just thinking like, oh, these people look at me a certain way, or even, in school or at work, they point out certain things that I'm different because I am different from, the Swiss, and whether it's your nationality, your religion, your ethnicity, all of that comes into play. And I was very focused on those differences, but there came a point in my life, and a lot of this goes back to a book that I read that kind of changed my life, which
Oh,
is The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, a classic. But through that book, I really started to learn to maybe, and when I describe this, it's kind of hard because there's so many different components, to not blame others for what I'm going through. So in my head, a lot of times I recognize this pattern only after I became aware of that. So a lot of times, something happened to me, I would think, oh, this, I wish my parents never came here, or I wish this, I wish I didn't grow up with this culture. I don't want to be a part of this. I don't, want people to see me a certain way. And I actually started to learn to take that blame away and, in a way, almost take accountability for it and be like, this is who I am. And it's some sort of acceptance within myself. And this was really hard to learn because whenever I would hear someone say these things, I would be like, ugh, whatever, because when you're in that state of mind, you can't like make that shift immediately. So I think that was kind of a crucial process for me to change my perspective on how I came about. And, I think that's where I started to see the beauty in things and shift away from focusing on the negative side of things, even though they still exist, and they're not just going to disappear, but accepting them and being aware of how you approach things and how you think about things really makes a difference.
you said some incredible things in what you just gave for a lot of young individuals and for a lot of people, even for me, who I was born in Lebanon and then moved to the States as a child, 12 really, and it took decades for
Mhm.
me to shift and begin to open up to what living in the United States is and becoming a lot more open. Even to this day, I will have conversations with certain family members or certain people and go, look, that comes from the culture of this being brought up in Lebanon. So I can identify some of those things for me to go, oh, look, they're showing up right now
Right.
in me. And that's beautiful, actually. Sometimes you go, that's why I say things this way. That's why I do this. And it's that recognition. So it's wonderful that you started to recognize and take responsibility and accountability for being you and for becoming you.
Absolutely.
How how much easier has it become to understand your parents and for them to understand you? Because your dad went through similar things as you. I'm asking this question because I could tell you my dad, when we first arrived in the States, was very much protective. It's horrible to describe it this way, but closed-minded, but it's not closed-minded. It's really what the culture that he grew up with and so on. And then it took lots of decades for him to become way more open and always loving, but so much more open. And for me to be able to connect and communicate with him, because I could tell when I was young, I had a really hard time getting along and I would shut down. So, how do you see yourself doing with your parents, with your family?
Absolutely. That's a really good question. One thing I think that, and this I've read this recently and it kind of really stuck with me, is that our parents, and me being the firstborn child especially, like our parents are being parents for the first time. So they don't have previous experience. Everybody, they're just trying their best to be parents. And I think as a child, you don't think about that. You're just annoyed by whatever is going on. And I think realizing that helped me to empathize with them and the choices that they made in raising me and my two younger sisters. And yeah, it's kind of like an experiment, and I see differences even with my sisters, and I learned not to point them out as much. But now even my mom sometimes, she says it. She's like, yeah, we did things different with you than we did with your younger sisters. And that's just part of parenting. You learn as you grow. And I think one big thing that I used to always point out was the fact that my parents spent their early years in Afghanistan. So their foundation was in Afghanistan. They were taught the values, they were taught the culture, and the people around them were the same. And that's one thing that I always told my mom, like, you don't understand me because the people around you were always like you. And for me, it's the opposite. The people around me are the same, but I'm different than them. And I think that was hard for them to understand as well, because to them it was clear, like, certain things you just don't do them because it's our culture, because we weren't raised that way. But I couldn't find an explanation why my friends could, do whatever they wanted to do and I couldn't. Why is it okay here and not okay in a different part of the world? So,
The $1 million question.
yeah, and this is hard, even for a parent now that I think about it, to explain, because how do you explain that when your environment operates differently and there's values within you that you were taught, and you have to find new ways of explaining it to your children, of why we do things the way we do them, not just because that's how it is. No, you need an explanation, because especially as kids, kids are curious. They want to know why and how things work. So I think that's one of the big things that I always carry with me when it comes, and parents, like my mom always said, like, one day when you have your own children, you will see, like, how hard it is. You never know until you experience it yourself. But yeah, I think one learning is definitely that they're doing it for the first time too, and they're learning just like we are.
Sahar, the people that know you describe you as intelligent, wise, and kind. And you are definitely all of that. even from the little bit of conversation that we've dealt with so far.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Let's add another level to this. Not only cultures, but you actually know 5 languages. Tell me
Yes.
what the languages are.
So I speak Farsi, or Dari is the dialect, which is my mother language.
Hmm?
Then I speak German, English, French, and Spanish.
And tell me what learning all these languages have created within you as a person.
Mhm. It's really interesting because I just recently thought about this a lot, and I saw a post about it too, which intrigued me to talk about it. Um, it's said that every language comes with its own personality. And I never thought of it in that sense because when you speak a language, you switch, or at least for me, I switch into it automatically without really thinking. It's almost like intuition. So speaking Farsi at home with my parents, German outside in school, and maybe little uh, information on Switzerland. They actually have 4 national languages, which is why we learned German, French, and English in school. So the 4 national languages are German, French, Italian, and Romansh. And depending on which region in Switzerland you live in, you learn that specific language. And I grew up in the German-speaking part, so we had German and French as our secondary language. And English is kind of universal, so it's taught in all the schools. And then Spanish, I chose voluntarily in 8th grade. So I had 4 years of Spanish. I love the Spanish culture. I love the language. And speaking of that, I think every language is connected to the culture. So, and we used to make jokes about this because my cousins here in the US, they're like, yeah, German speakers, like you guys sound so cold and so mean and so harsh. And I never saw it that way because I just grew up speaking German and, I don't consider myself as mean or cold. So it didn't really make sense in my head, but you don't know how you sound like from the outside because you speak it. You know what you're saying. And when I saw that post, it made me think about it because I really thought about it, and I do switch personalities to a certain extent because when I'm in Switzerland, I speak German to my friends. I kind of switch into my Swiss personality and I sound different. My mimics are different. And I started to be more aware of that. And it's really interesting because it's so connected to the culture. When I speak Farsi, I have a different tone, and Farsi has a different way of expressing yourself. It's more kind of poetic in a certain sense. And then English, I developed more since I moved here. And funny enough, when I first came here, I thought my English is, fluent very well. But then there was certain instances where, someone would say a phrase or use sarcasm, and I was so confused. I didn't know what that meant. And then, it kind of humbles you in the moment. I'm like, is that a joke or are you being serious right now? So there is so much that goes into a language, which is really interesting. And yeah, I can say that, I switch around. even with my personalities. And I had a really interesting conversation with one of my family members last week about this. And he's a scientist, so he's a biochemistry professor at a university. And he asked me a really interesting question, which confused me at first, but he said, what is the most difficult thing that you do at your job? And I thought about it, I came up with some of the things. I said, yeah, I have to, deal with difficult clients or things like that. And then he was like, I'll tell you because I know what it is for people who move from one country to another and speak a different language. He said it's you thinking and speaking in a language that is not your native or your intuitive language. That is the hardest thing that all of us do who don't have that, because you do have to make that switch, like we were just talking about it. And the way you think, the way you speak, those things all take energy from you without you even really realizing it in the moment. And I was like, wow, that's so true. I never thought of that. Because you just kind of automatically do that. And I never really thought about, that can be an extra step, which some people don't have. And the way you express yourself, the choice of your words, all that plays into it.
I absolutely love the fact that you're so aware of the different idiosyncrasies that go on in languages, that just because we speak a language, it doesn't mean that we are completely aware of everything within that realm of that language. Because I can tell you to this day, Sahar, there's still things that come across that go, I'm not sure what that means.
Right.
Because of cultures, and you're talking generations that have had things that occurred that they mean something that you wouldn't know because you didn't grow up here. So,
Yeah.
what made you decide to move from Switzerland back to the United States
Mhm.
and go through this process of, again, even though you're born here, a new culture again?
Also a very good question. I always had the US in my mind, even when I was younger, because we would visit family almost every year. And, when I was a kid, it was always the fun place to be. All cousins get together, my grandparents are here, and it's just fun times. And as I got older, I just always had that opportunity, like maybe that's the key word, the opportunity in the back of my head. But I never really like wanted to make the move just because I love Switzerland. I have my friends there. I love the culture. I love the people and everything that was set up there. So I didn't really have an urge to get out, but at the same time, that opportunity was always kind of in the air. So being a US citizen and being young and, not having crazy responsibilities that keep me in one place and my natural curiosity, I think it kind of really pushed me more, especially after I graduated from school. And, I had the idea of going to school here in the US once I finish in Switzerland. But then I also didn't want to leave my parents and my sisters. So it was a long back and forth, I was like, is it really worth it? But then also I will probably never be in this situation again where I'm, free to do pretty much anything. I'm not married, I don't have kids or anything like that. So I was like, you know what? I'll just give it a try. If it works, great. If I like it, if not, I always have the opportunity to come back and continue where I left off. So having that thought, I think it gave me a little bit of like a safety feeling of, worst case, you can just return and continue. And luckily, I have family and relatives here in California who, have a support system. So I just took all my courage and packed my bags and started the journey. And I didn't really know where it's going to take me, which was the scariest part about it at that time. Because I left a job that I had, with steady income, and I had no idea what's going to expect me here in the US. But I think that opportunity and, America being the land of opportunities, that's what pushed me to just give it a try. And I studied business, so in my head, I wanted to like in the future build something up that, I would enjoy doing. And yeah, that's kind of why and how I left. And now it's been, I think, 2.5 years. And I've met amazing people like yourself, and I have family who supports me, and my career kind of took complete different routes. So it's really like amazing, and you don't know what comes into your life unexpected. So I think one big lesson was for me to say yes to things and be open to different paths and opportunities.
And you've done an incredible job at that. Since you've had the opportunity to work both in Switzerland and now in the United States, what would you describe as one of the, I don't want to say difference, but the opportunities that are different in the States than in Switzerland?
Very good question. Switzerland, if I have to describe it without sounding bad, is they're very strict. So there's more boundaries and barriers to like get into, or if you want to do something completely different. Let's say if you want to start a business, there's the system is set up with more barriers legally and systematically. So I think generally speaking, there's more rules that you need to follow, which I personally never minded. Like, it never bothered me. I actually saw it as a beautiful thing because it, worked within the society. And it's, more efficient in certain ways. Like if you have to get a document from the government, it's very set up, like you get your appointment and there's steps. Everything is very in the box. And in the US, from my experience so far, things can get chaotic and different sources give you different information. So you have to find your way through things, but that also opens certain loopholes where I think the barriers and the entry barriers are lower. So, and in terms of business, especially, I think you have more chances to try out different things. And that's, I think, where the opportunity comes in.
Sahar, thank you for answering that. I know that's not an easy question to answer. And I was leading to why, honestly, people see the United States as the land of opportunity because of all those things we just described, the ability to maneuver in so many ways that in certain other countries, in certain other culture, there's a lot more demand on how you do everything. Where here you get the opportunity to actually step out and do things your way, learn, fail, and learn some more and grow. So
Right.
thank you for describing that, which takes me to your current wonderful role as an operations manager for an auto company, but in the employment world. Would you describe what you do for people so that they understand all these things that you've learned that we were talking about, how they come into what you're doing now?
Yes. So the way I kind of started my, or continued, I should say, my career in the US was, I started working at Starbucks at first just to kind of get my foot in the door and have a little bit of a side income, until I get my residency, because you have to live in California for at least a year to become a California resident, which I then wanted to use to apply to college. So, I worked at Starbucks. I worked at my cousin's transportation company, just kind of coordinating, taking calls, things like that, just really to get started and, get a taste of the American life and how the work life is here. And I was just, looking which direction I wanted to go to. And funny enough, my cousin, who I used to live with at the time, she was recruited by a recruiting agency. She worked at a dealership, so there's specialized in automotive. And she moved up here to Northern California. And at that time, I was looking for other opportunities. So she told him about me. If, anything opens up, I'm happy to have a look. So he was starting his own company, the recruiter, and he reached out and he was like, why don't you come work for me? So this all kind of happened through LinkedIn, which is also interesting. He reached out and I was open to it at the time, to really just try anything, because me being someone who hasn't really found the true, passion, what I really love, enjoy doing and all that, I learned to say yes to things, even though, I had zero experience in automotive and recruiting, no idea what to expect whatsoever. But I think the person behind it seemed interesting to me and how they sold the opportunity to me. So I was like, I'll give it a try. Just like I said, I'll move to the US. I'll give it a try. And yeah, ever since, the idea of my role was to be kind of like a executive assistant or coordinator. And it really developed into me digging deep into the operational side of the business and really understanding the recruiting business and people, which is what I think really intrigued me, because I'm not so much of a like automotive person, if I'm honest, but the people behind it is what really interested me and continues to interest me, because you can really change someone's life moving them from one state to another for a different job that, they love or hate, depending on the situation, and move their families with them sometimes if they have to relocate. So there's a lot of components that go into it, and it's very interesting. And I never even knew that recruiting within the automotive industry was a thing. So all these things, I think, learning about it and, just developing into it from an unexpected standpoint it's a crazy journey, but I love it because I get to see so many different aspects, and I definitely try more to put myself in situations where I'm not 100% comfortable, because as cliche as it sounds, it's really true that you grow outside of your comfort zone when you put yourself in front of people, in front of things that you're not very comfortable doing. And that's been a very big lesson for me since I started working here.
Sahar, I'd love to know, how do you think your different cultures and growing up in different countries and the various languages have contributed to how well you're doing working with a variety of individuals?
Mm-hmm. I honestly think that's probably one of the biggest superpowers, because again, like the languages, you don't think about it when you do things, but when you try to see it from the outside, you realize like which components it's built of. Because I think the empathy that I have and the understanding of people with different backgrounds, it all comes from my own journey, my own background, because I understand them. When they say something, I see past certain things, or I can interpret things on a completely different scale than someone who has not experienced what I have. And this really comes in handy, especially when you're working with people. So yeah, I think empathy is a big thing, and understanding, and all those different components, they become your superpower, and you can piece things together quickly, because you see things that you wouldn't if you had not had the experiences in your life.
I love that you're saying all of this, because for anyone that's listening, especially the younger generation, the things that right now feel like they're overwhelming, and they are overwhelming at times, that those become the wonderful blocks that help build you up into things that you can't even imagine. So
Absolutely.
go ahead, Sahar.
Yeah. You don't see them until, until maybe for me, even until someone pointed it out to me. They're like, wow, how do you know this? And I'm like, what do you mean? Isn't that obvious? And they're like, no, I never thought of that. And it's just, yeah, it's exactly like you said, things that, you struggle with, or you find maybe almost unfair, that you have to deal with navigating with differences, and growing up between different cultures, or even facing, racism and things like that. They really build you and give you the skill set to build those building blocks that you mentioned.
I'm curious, Sahar, can you give some tips for people that are looking to get employed, to transfer? Are there some tips that you can give them since you're on the recruiting side? I had someone a couple of weeks ago that gave some information about your resume, and she gave some incredible tips. Are there things that you can give individuals that are looking to get employed that you go, oh, pay attention to this because of what you have learned so far?
Yes. I think one thing that I've also learned from myself is to never sell yourself short, whether if it's in your resume or in an interview, um, because that also shows confidence and you know what you're good at, and really take advantage of what you're good at. Another thing that I think is important is, and I don't know what the right term is, but maybe professionalism, no matter who you talk to. This is interesting because as a recruiting agency, you're the middle person between the candidate and the client, right? So the candidate, when they're speaking to you, they're not directly speaking to their future employer. So sometimes I've, encountered individuals who maybe don't take us as the middle part as serious, and it comes off as a little unprofessional, but they might not think about the fact that, if we're the ones connecting you to your employer, you need to impress us as well and show us that, you are a good fit for this organization. I think that's one thing that I've realized when it comes to like the professional world, to really remember to treat people the same in your professionalism, whether, it's your boss, your coworker, no matter who. And respect, obviously. But to me, it's obvious, not always as obvious. Um, yeah, these are the things that come to my mind right now. And I mean, this is probably a very basic one, but be yourself, uh, be true, be honest, be who you are. And I think that's what gets you the furthest, because if you try to change things, they will catch up to you uh, at a later stage. If, things don't go your way, then yeah. So
Thank you for allowing me to put you on the spot, and you gave incredible information for people to understand as they go out there and look for expansions for themselves. Sahar, what's the most enjoyable thing about your current?
um, I would say, again, it's people. Really, the biggest cultural lesson that I've gotten so far, because we work nationwide. So I speak to people from different states, different backgrounds, different nationalities, all that. And to be honest with you, my version of the US was always condensed to California, because my family lives in California. We would only visit California, maybe Las Vegas, Nevada at the most. I have one aunt that lives in Florida. So my view of the United States was very limited. And, now that I speak to people from the Midwest, from, the East Coast, and people who moved to the US just recently from Canada, from England, from Australia, like that aspect is, I think, what I like the most, because I'm always so amazed by people's backgrounds when I hear about it, because I always read about, people, moving and hearing their stories, but when you have someone who's talking to you one-on-one and they tell you their story, it's super interesting. And sometimes I have to like catch myself because we like deep dive into things that are interesting. I'm like, okay, we need to stay on track because you're trying to get a job and not, give me your autobiography. But yeah, I think that is a big, big thing. And then also on the business side, I think I love that I get to see the nitty-gritty of what it means to build a business in the US, whether it's laws, whether it's building a team, working with people, whether it's, which tool do we use, how to build our website, all those things when you actually get to do them versus learning about them, in your school book, that is huge and I think invaluable experience.
I would definitely agree with that one. Learning something and actually applying it is a
Yeah.
lot different, which is great. I'd like to know, because you are the middle person,
Mhm.
what's it like for the people that are looking to hire individuals and for you to be able to clearly understand what it is that they're looking for?
Mhm. One big thing that I always try to understand is the company culture, how the organization is built, um, hierarchy levels and employee benefits, all those things that play into a role when someone is interested in an organization. So it's almost like you look for things in the company that you would look for as an employee. So if I see a company that has great benefits or has a great work environment culture, then I will be more happy to refer someone to that place. So those are usually easier. But of course, we also work with organizations that are smaller and maybe don't have all these great benefits, but they have different things to offer. They're small, they're family business or family oriented. The area is nice, So with every level, I think you have different aspects that you can use to sell. And the sales part is another huge thing that I've learned because I'm not a salesperson at all, but these are things that I've learned. So how do you sell a dealership that is somewhere in the outskirts of Ohio, where I would think I would not want to move there, but there are people who want to leave the city and they want to go to the countryside with their families. So I think piecing those together, like piecing the individuals that are willing to make that move together with the company that is looking for that kind of individual, that's the most amazing part because it exists. Just because I think, I wouldn't want to move there doesn't mean that there's tons of people that would give it up in a heartbeat. And yeah, that's, I think, I don't
Thank
know
you.
if
I
I
know you're answering hard questions from me, but you're giving so much incredible information that is so wise for people to connect at a better level, whether they're looking for work or whether they're looking at a company to go work for. The
yeah.
things to look for that they may not even pay attention to. Sahar, for you on a personal level, because I don't, I personally do not separate what I do as work from who I am. It's an extension of who I am. And because I get to interview individuals, because I get to train and do different things, I look at these things as just extensions of who I am, and they impact me in my personal life as well as in my business life. So for you, because you got into the recruiting side and became incredible at what you're doing, really, how does that flow into your own personal life? Because you are in a new country. It is your country, but you're in a new country and new culture.
True. Um, that's a very good question. So I think it made it easier for me to accept my circumstances to a certain degree because I see how other people struggle, you know, like in their own journey. And when you hear stories from people, it makes you think about your own, right?
Mhm.
Or like even stories of my grandparents, or all those things make me think about my own choices in life. And if I'm complaining about something, I can think about it twice and be like, I'm actually in a very blessed situation to be in. So I think hearing those stories expand my view of the world and allow me to reinvent myself, just like I did when I left Switzerland. I came here and I was like, okay, where do I start? What do I do? I need a driver's license. I need, like things that you never think about before. But I think it's really cool that I get to do that, because if you stay in one spot in the same environment, that's all you know. And when you leave it, you see a new world, you see new people, you see people with different backgrounds. It really adds to the mix. So I think maybe reinventing myself was something that I take out of this and continue to do that probably for in the future.
I love it. I absolutely love how you answer these things with authenticity, and you don't attempt to avoid the questions. You really do go into the question. And that's really helpful for a lot of young individuals that might have grown up in the United States that only know their town, their area. And now they get to see that even across the United States, there's so much distinctions and differences that are beautiful opportunities for us to grow. And you get to experience it through your job as well as how you grow up.
Yeah.
If I gave you the opportunity to go, okay, Sahar, I'm going to put you in front of a variety of young individuals from different countries, different cultures, and I'm going to give you your chance to speak to them of how should they move forward so that we have better human beings, we have better employees, we have better entrepreneurs. Is there something that you go, if I had the chance to step in front of a stage and speak to a whole range of young individuals, let's say early 20s,
Mhm.
is there something you'd like to say to them?
Hmm. I think I would tell them what I wish I would have heard myself earlier. And they're the things that I learned over time. And the difficulty with that is it's situational, right? If I tell you don't take life too seriously, you're not going to wake up tomorrow and be like, oh, let's just take it easy and be grateful every day. But things that add to your routine every day, that in the long run will make the difference. And one thing that always helps me is gratitude. And I know you talk about that, which I love. I think gratitude has been and will always be an integral part of my daily routine. For me, it's through prayer. For others, there's so many different ways you can practice gratitude. I think that's one big thing. And then I think I'm just thinking about how to take away fear of the future, fear of what's coming next, because I know I had a lot of fears. I still do, but learning how to deal with them and being aware. I think that's also one big thing. And it sounds so generic, but being aware of your mind, of your thought process, really helped me change how I see the world and how I change myself as a person. And I keep thinking of the book of The Power of Now, because even though the main message of the book is, The Power of Now talks about the only moment that exists is now. The future doesn't exist. The past doesn't exist. The only thing we have is right now. So learning to apply that for me is what, changed everything. And it's really the foundation of gratitude, of having fears, of all that. And it's a practice, I read that book probably 3-4 times up until now. It's like learning a new skill. You have to change how your mind is wired. And I think that's what really helped me, because whenever I heard people talk when I was 16, 17, like the motivational speakers, it all sounds amazing, but I didn't know, I didn't know how to apply it. And I always thought I'm doing something wrong because it's not working. And I had to realize for myself that it's a learning process. People have different backgrounds, different experiences. So being okay with that it can take time. And yeah.
All incredible. You're speaking my language. I refer to it as mindfulness and all of these pieces to it. So thank you for saying that, for young individuals to understand that they can, over time, change the way that they see things and they can take control. Sahar, what's the best way for individuals to get in touch with you? I have a few
So
more questions, but let's give them how they can contact you.
yeah, sure. I'm pretty present on LinkedIn. So if you just search my name, Sahar Tahiri, on LinkedIn, you can find me there. I'm not so much active on other platforms, but that's probably the best approach. And
That's perfect. And it's interesting because you're leading me to my next question, because I know in your previous work, you've done social media. So you're not on a lot of platforms, but what do you believe is the greatest thing about social media for individuals?
So what I've learned is, the endless opportunities for a business to be present on social media and to reach people with from different ages, different backgrounds. It's incredible what you can do. And even with your personal branding, which is something that I've been learning on LinkedIn to build besides, business, because I feel like, ads and all that have become very annoying on a lot of these platforms. But what I really enjoy on LinkedIn is the personal brand that people talk about themselves, their journey, and moving away from that promotional, selling aspect. And that's a direction that, I've seen marketing take on LinkedIn, even for businesses. So even for us at Global Auto Staffing, every employee, like, we have a LinkedIn presence. We do represent our brand. We have the banner, we have the logo and all that, but we don't only talk about our services. We talk about the person that we are behind the business. And I feel like that's kind of a take that has become very popular. People want to see the person behind the brand, their story, if they're relatable, if, they can find that human touch to them, because especially with the rise of artificial intelligence and robotics and everything going on, that human touch is becoming more distant. And I believe that this human touch, personal brand has increased in value so much, and it's benefiting businesses. So we are also applying that approach. We, talk about who we are. Like, for me, I talk about communication, the languages, and that aspect of the personality behind the business, behind the brand. And I think that's awesome. I've seen that on LinkedIn. I don't know, like, Instagram, Facebook, how they're evolving, but this is kind of my interpretation of the social media. And I did work with social media before. So I used to work at an insurance company in Switzerland where we had different campaigns. And even then, it was like we wanted to move away from just selling our product, and it was focusing on sustainability. How do we support our community? How do we build trust to a customer? And that's really important, I think. And if a business does not want to open to that side of marketing, I think they'll have a hard time in the future.
I say drop the mic on that piece. All of it. Pure gem. Pure gem. Sahar, how would you describe your values of who you are as an entrepreneur and also as a human being? Like, for me, it took me a while to narrow them down, and they attempted to have me narrow them down to one. Is like, that's never going to happen. Kindness is one of my values, gratitude, love, respect, and understanding. And I feel that that permeates everything that I touch, whether I'm training, whether I'm doing a podcast, to come across that way. And those are values that through the years have shown up even bigger. What are your values that you go, here's some of the things that I can point to that I go, that's me. I could definitely say that's part of me, part of my soul and my journey.
That is a Very good one. I think I would also say empathy, kindness, respect, professionalism is a big one, especially for, on the entrepreneur side. And honesty and probably selflessness. I don't know if that's the right word, but putting I sometimes am described as a people's pleaser. So I a lot of times catch myself putting other people's interests before mine. And it's not always good, but it's something that I have like carried with me. And it makes me who I am. And one other big thing is connection. So being in touch with family and friends. I think, yeah, family and the people that are important to me. I want to always make sure that I can show up and be good and be present.
I'm going to ask you, are you good to yourself?
Sometimes I think I could be better a lot of times, I'll be honest. I tend to be very hard on myself. So that is definitely something that I am working on, but it is very important.
Sahar, I love you and I'm grateful for you. And thank you for your incredible authenticity today. I know sometimes it's not easy to be on the side receiving the questions and really answering them. So thank you for doing that. And before we leave this podcast, is there anything that you'd like to say that I didn't ask you?
No, I think we covered everything. I'm very grateful that I got to be on a podcast. It's my first time being on a podcast, so I feel honored and I'm grateful for you, and I love you too.
Thank you. And I know we can go on for hours, but we'll let it go till the next podcast. And to our incredible viewers and listeners, please remember your attitude always determines your altitude in life. And we'll see you in the next part. Thank you, Sahar.
Thank you.